Metamorphic Cabaret. The velvet curtains smelled like forgotten perfume and cigarette ash. Maya pressed her palms against it, feeling the worn fabric pulse with bass from the band below. On the other side, the Théâtre des Rêves, where fantasies took flesh and walked. "You're on in 2, the stage manager said, not looking up from his clipboard. His name was something forgettable. Everything about him was forgettable. Deliberately so. Maya had learned that the people who worked behind the scenes here cultivated erasure like a survival skill. She'd auditioned 3 weeks ago on a dare from her roommate, standing on this same stage in an empty theater while Madame Silk watched from the shadows. "Just think of what you want," the proprietress had purred. "Let it fill you. We'll do the rest." Maya had thought of gentle things then. A lover's hand in her hair, the weight of being held, the soft press of lips against her temple. Nothing had happened. Madame Silk had sighed, begun to wave her off, when Maya's fear broke through, the fear that she'd never be loved, that she was too jagged, too hungry, too much. And suddenly, there was something on stage with her. It had too many arms. They sprouted from its shoulders, and ribcage and spine, reaching, grasping, pulling her close with impossible tenderness. Its face was beautiful and terrible, a shifting kaleidoscope of every person who'd ever made her heart quicken. When it kissed her, she tasted copper. A thin line of blood traced down her chin. The lights had come up. Madame Silk was standing, eyes bright as broken glass. "Welcome to the company, darling." Now Maya stood in the wings, watching Christophe finish his act. His fantasies were baroque and beautiful. Gardens that grew from his fingertips, baroque palaces that assembled themselves from his breath, lovers who danced with mathematical precision. The audience sighed with pleasure. When he bowed, rose petals dissolved into the air like sugar in rain. Safe fantasies, lovely lies. "Merde," Christophe whispered as he swept past her, using the theatrical curse for luck. His smile was kind, but his eyes held a warning she couldn't read. Then she was walking into the lights. The stage was empty except for a single chair. The audience, a sea of faces blurred by stage smoke and distance, rustled with anticipation. The theater drew a particular crowd. Sensation seekers, the bored wealthy, artists hunting for inspiration, and others whose reasons Maya didn't want to guess. She sat, closed her eyes. Think of what you want. Her mind went to the usual places first. Strong arms, soft words, someone who would stay. But those thoughts were surface things, polite fictions. Beneath them, her real desires writhed. She wanted to be consumed, to be wanted so desperately that it hurt, that it unmade her, that it crossed the line between passion and violence. She wanted a love that had teeth. The air pressure changed. Maya opened her eyes, and it was already there, forming from shadow and stage light and the shapeless hunger in her chest. It was humanoid, roughly, but wrong in ways that made her pulse quicken. Its skin looked like it had been sculpted from midnight, and its hands should have been. There were too many elegant fingers that multiplied and divided like a feverish equation. It moved toward her with liquid grace. The audience gasped. When it touched her face, she felt it everywhere. A dozen caresses at once, sliding through her hair, tracing her collarbone, tilting her chin up. Its mouth met hers, and the kiss was exactly as she'd feared and wanted. Sharp, demanding, tasting of iron and honey. She felt her lips split, felt the creature drink the small bead of blood that welled there. Somewhere far away, the audience was screaming, but it sounded like applause. The creature held her closer, and she realized it was whispering. The words weren't in any language she knew, but she understood them in her bones. Yes, like this. You taste like loneliness. You taste like rage beneath silk. You taste like every moment you smiled when you wanted to scream. Maya pulled back, gasping. The creature watched her with eyes that were her eyes, reflected and multiplied. Then it bowed to the audience and dissolved like smoke. The lights came up. The theater erupted in applause that sounded hungry. After that first night, Maya couldn't stop. The crowds grew larger. Madame Silk moved her to the headline slot. Other performers watched her with a mixture of awe and fear. Every night, Maya took the stage and let her mind unspool its monstrous desires into being. A lover whose embrace was too tight, who cracked ribs with affection. A figure made of broken mirrors, each shard reflecting a different version of herself, kissing every reflection until her lips were ribboned with cuts. A thing that was all mouth and hunger, that loved her by trying to swallow her whole. The audience couldn't get enough. They screamed their delight. They threw roses that turned to ash before they hit the stage. They came back night after night, bringing friends, bringing rivals, bringing the jaded and the searching. Maya became famous in the way peculiar to that city's underground, whispered about in cafes, written up in art journals, sought after by collectors who wanted to capture that particular brand of beautiful horror. Money flowed. Opportunities arrived. She could have anything she wanted, except sleep. The creatures stayed with her now, even after she left the stage. She'd catch glimpses of too many hands in her peripheral vision while walking home. She'd wake to the feeling of that sharp kiss against her mouth, tasting blood, touching her lip only to find it whole. Her apartment walls seemed to breathe. It's normal, Christoph told her one night, sharing a cigarette in the alley behind the theater. The first year is always the hardest. Your fantasies are so much stronger than the rest of ours. They're closer to nightmares, I think. They don't want to stay on stage. How do I make them stop? He looked at her with something like pity. You don't. You make peace with them, or they eat you from the inside. Why do you think everyone who works backstage makes themselves so forgettable? Why do you think Madame Silk never performs herself anymore? Maya thought of the stage manager, the costume designer, the lighting crew, faces that slid out of memory even as you looked at them. Protective camouflage. the erasure of desire. What happened to her? Maya asked. Christoph took a long drag on the cigarette. She loved what she created too much. She stepped into her own fantasy one night and never quite came back out. What walks around wearing her face is just an echo, the fantasy piloting the body. That night, Maya's creature came to her in full for the first time outside the theater. She woke to find it sitting at the foot of her bed, watching her with those kaleidoscope eyes. All those hands folded in a gesture, almost like prayer. When it spoke, its voice was her voice, stripped of pretense. You made me, it said. Every night you feed me your loneliness, your rage, your hunger for obliteration. I am so full of you, Maya. Soon I'll be more real than you are. You're not real, Maya whispered. You're just fantasy, just what you want most. The creature smiled with her smile, twisted into something sharp. That's the realest thing there is. That's more honest than anything you show the waking world. It reached out with a dozen hands, and Maya couldn't tell if she was flinching or leaning in. I could devour you, it said softly, tenderly. Take the parts of you that hurt, the memories that wake you at 3 a.m., the voice that says you're not enough. I could eat them all, and you would feel so light afterward, so empty, so clean. And then I would be you, and you would be dream. The creature's hands hovered a breath away from her skin. Isn't that what you want? To stop being the one who hurts, to become the hurt itself, and thus transcend it. Maya looked at this thing she had made from her most secret hungers, saw how beautiful it was, how terrible, how true, saw how easy it would be to say yes, to let it peel away everything that made her difficult and complicated and raw, until only the fantasy remained. The audience would love it. She would be perfect, a performance with no performer, a desire with no one left to desire. She thought of Madame Silk, that echo in human form. No, Maya said. The creature tilted its head. Why not? Because, Maya's voice cracked. Because the hurt is how I know I'm alive. Because I'm more than what I hunger for. Because if I let you eat all the fragile parts, there won't be anything left to feel with. The creature sat in silence for a long moment. Then, impossibly, it smiled. And this time it was sad rather than sharp. Good, it said. That's the first thing you've wanted that might actually save you. It began to fade, not into nothing, but into something quieter, less solid. It would still be there, Maya understood. In the corners of her vision, in the space between sleep and waking. But it would be hers, not the other way around. Will you still perform? It asked as it dissipated. Maya thought about the stage, the lights, the hungry crowd. Thought about showing people the beautiful, terrible truth of wanting. About making them feel less alone in their own monstrous desires. Yes, she said, but differently now. The next night, Maya took the stage as usual. The audience leaned forward in anticipation, ready for their dose of exquisite horror. She closed her eyes, let her mind open. But this time, when the creature formed, she stood up and took its hand, all of its hands. Let it hold her, kiss her, but didn't let it bleed her. When it tried to bite down, she pulled back. When it tried to squeeze too tight, she loosened its grip. "We're going to dance," she told herself. And they did. It wasn't beautiful the way Christoph's fantasies were beautiful. It wasn't comfortable. The creature stumbled sometimes, uncertain in this new choreography. Maya's hands shook as she guided those too many fingers into patterns that expressed hunger without harm, passion without obliteration. But it was real. The audience watched in confusion at first, then in something deeper. Someone in the front row started to cry. Others shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, moved. When the creature finally bowed and faded, it felt different. Lighter, still hungry, still sharp, but no longer quite so ravenous. The applause was smaller that night, scattered. Some people left early, disappointed, but the ones who stayed looked changed. Madame Silk came to her dressing room after the show. The proprietress moved with that peculiar grace that Maya now recognized as the movement of something wearing a person rather than being one. "That's not what they come here for," Madame Silk said. Her voice had the hollowness of wind through an empty house. "I know," Maya said. "You'll lose the crowd, lose your fame. Maybe." The thing in Madame Silk's form studied her with eyes that had seen too much, wanted too much, until wanting was all that remained. "But you won't lose yourself," it said finally. And there was something in its voice that might have been the original Madame Silk, an echo of whoever she'd been before she stepped into her fantasy and never came back. "No," Maya agreed, "I won't." She performed at the Théâtre des Rêves for 3 more months. Each night she danced with her creature, and each night she set boundaries around the hunger. The crowds did shrink. Some people wanted the thrill of pure nightmare, untamed and dangerous. But others came. People who recognized themselves in that struggle, who needed to see that you could face your most ravenous desires without being devoured by them. Eventually, Maya left the theater, started her own space, smaller, stranger. A place where performers could explore their fantasies, but weren't consumed by them. Where the creatures that came from their desires were met with curiosity rather than surrender. She still sees her creature sometimes, feels its hands in moments of loneliness, tastes copper when her desires threaten to overwhelm her sense of self. But it's quieter now, a conversation rather than a consumption. On some nights, when the stage lights hit just right, and her mind opens in that familiar way, the creature manifests fully. They move together in the space between hunger and wholeness, showing anyone who watches that you can be intimate with your monsters without becoming monstrous yourself. It's not a perfect piece. The creature is still sharp, still hungry, still capable of drawing blood, but it's hers. She's still herself, And in the end, that turned out to be what she wanted most of all.